A wildfire out in Utah has already torn through more than 93,000 acres. That fire is sitting at 0% contained. And yeah, that's exactly as bad as it sounds. And if you're anywhere near the East Coast, you're one of 75 million people at risk tonight. So the 4th of July weekend is shaping up as a genuine three-front event this year. Folks, this update just came in. And honestly, the situation has only gotten more serious today. We're going to walk you through the fire, the heat, and storms threatening fireworks. First, let's get to that wildfire, since it has exploded in size since this morning. The Cottonwood Fire is burning inside the Fishlake National Forest in central Utah right now. That's rugged, remote terrain, which means it makes fighting this fire even harder. Fire officials say it has grown explosively, now covering more than 93,000 acres. That's an area larger than many small cities combined, all burned in a matter of days. Crews still haven't stopped this fire spread anywhere, which is exactly what 0% means. Officials describe the fire's behavior and speed as something they have genuinely never seen before. Even veteran firefighters are being challenged by how fast this one moves. Honest to goodness. That's brutal heat, dangerously low humidity, and strong wind gusts fueling explosive growth. Which means the exact ingredients that make a fire spread fast are all present at once. A NOAA satellite is tracking a massive smoke plume rising high above the fire right now. That smoke isn't staying local either. It's spreading toward nearby communities as we speak. So air quality has turned unhealthy in nearby towns like Marysvale because of that smoke. Earl, a rancher out in western South Dakota, has watched fires like this move before. Earl says a fire with 0% containment is exactly the kind that keeps ranchers up at night. That's livestock and equipment sometimes having to move on almost no notice at all. He says out west, folks watch the smoke on the horizon the same way they watch storm cloud. That's the fire side of today's update. 93,000 acres and 0% contained. Now let's shift to the heat, because that same brutal heat is baking the entire East Coast. A massive heat dome remains locked over the eastern half of the country through the holiday. So it keeps pumping hot, humid air up from the Gulf of Mexico non-stop. That's extreme heat warnings active for New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and D.C. tonight. That same warning stretches into Delaware, Ohio, and North Carolina as well today. Baltimore and Richmond are also included in that same dangerous heat corridor today. So actual air temperatures are running in the mid-90s to around 105. That's the heat index for you, how it actually feels. Climbing to 105 to 15. So overnight lows aren't dropping below 80 degrees across a lot of that corridor, which means your body gets basically zero real recovery time before the next hot day starts. No joke. Authorities keep warning about heat stroke risk, and outdoor events have been canceled. Here's a detail that shows just how serious this heat has become, and it involves the World Cup. This heat is now crossing the safety threshold used to protect athletes during extreme conditions. That threshold, measured in something called WBGT, sits at 28 degrees Celsius for safety. So even healthy elite athletes competing in World Cup matches are at real risk right now. No two ways about it. When a heat wave threatens World Cup players, that tells you everything. Sandra, a retired librarian in Alexandria, Virginia, has followed that World Cup heat story closely. Sandra says knowing professional athletes are struggling puts everyday outdoor plans into real perspective. She swapped her holiday plans from a park picnic to something indoors. And honestly, good call. That's her keeping a cooler of ice water on the porch for anyone stopping by. That's the heat side of this update, part of a warning covering dozens of states. Now for front number 3. Since a storm belt is lurking along the northern edge of that heat, where all that hot air collides with cooler air pushing south, storms are firing up fast. So scattered but intense thunderstorm clusters are targeting the mid-Atlantic and Northeast tonight. The Storm Prediction Center just upgraded southern lower Michigan to an enhanced risk this afternoon. That cluster has a real history of producing damaging gusts, and it's moving fast. It's already produced measured gusts in the 60 to 70 mile per hour range. No joke. which means a swath of damaging wind is expected as this system pushes through Michigan tonight. A few of those gusts could even exceed 75 miles per hour in the strongest spots. So falling trees and scattered power outages are both realistic possibilities there tonight. So surface temperatures running past 90 with dew points in the 70s fuel this system. That's exactly the fuel a storm like this needs, and there's plenty of it out there. This combination is creating a storm energy gradient. Forecasters rarely see this strong in one spot. That storm energy gradient is part of the same setup putting 75 million people at risk. Dale, a retired electrician up in Toledo, Ohio, sits right next door to that Michigan threat. Dale says a storm history of 60 to 70 mile per hour gust gets his attention fast. He's already checked his flashlights and moved anything loose off his back porch, just in case. So losing power heading into a holiday weekend this hot is never just an inconvenience, he says. So a new severe weather zone was just added over eastern Pennsylvania into New York. That's the same zone stretching into New Jersey ahead of a developing storm cluster. Cities like Allentown, Trenton, and White Plains all sit inside that same developing zone. So surface temperatures are pushing past 100 degrees ahead of that cluster, which means the atmosphere there is primed for sudden wet downburst capable of tree damage. Heads up, a few severe wind gusts are possible there too as storms move through tonight. Out in western South Dakota and Nebraska, storms are firing along the Black Hills again today. That's steep lapse rates setting up a real risk of very large hail up there. That activity is expected to organize into a bowing storm cluster by this evening. So it will likely track roughly along the Nebraska and South Dakota border tonight. So both severe wind and large hail remain real threats as that cluster tracks east, which means folks along that border region shouldn't let their guard down after dark. A hot, humid air mass across southeast Nebraska is helping fuel that same storm threat. Earl says a storm tracking the Nebraska-South Dakota border is exactly the kind he watches closest. Storms are expected to intensify along existing outflow boundaries and push into Iowa this evening. That's extreme instability supporting a real risk of supercells forming in that same region. That's those supercells carrying a genuine risk of large hail and damaging winds tonight, which means Iowa residents should treat any warning tonight as a serious, real threat. A separate boundary is tracking eastward across the Mississippi River and into northern Illinois today. So Rockford, South Bend, and Fort Wayne all fall along that same tracking boundary. So the air mass ahead of that boundary is extremely moist and dangerously unstable. So models suggest that storm system could grow upscale into a widespread wind event. That swath could stretch from northern Illinois into Indiana, Michigan, and northwest Ohio, which means millions of people across 5 states share some version of tonight's wind threat. Frank, a retired teacher down in Springfield, Illinois, is right inside that same storm corridor. Frank says a widespread wind event heading into a holiday weekend always makes him double-check his radio. He's got water, flashlights, and a backup phone charger sitting by the door already. Honest to goodness, the trick is being ready before the sky turns, not scrambling after. That same 75 million person risk stretches right through this exact corridor too, down in the Tennessee Valley and southern Appalachians. Disorganized but persistent storms are expected again. Those storms tend to move slowly, dumping heavy rain over the same areas repeatedly. That's the strongest cells still carrying a risk of damaging gust and small hail, which means flash flooding is a real concern anywhere those storms decide to stall out. So here's a question for you. Which of today's 3 fronts worries you the most? Is it the wildfire out west, the heat and World Cup story, or the storm belt up north? Also, type the name of your city in the comments so we can track it for you. Today's slight risk zone stretches from New York and Chicago down through Philadelphia and Baltimore. That zone covers more than 75 million people across a huge stretch of the country. A broader marginal risk zone adds more than 60 million more people into that same mix. So all of that storm energy is lining up almost exactly with holiday evening plans. Concerts and outdoor fireworks displays across the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast are seriously at risk tonight. That risk doesn't stop after the 4th either. It carries right into Sunday evening too, which means Saturday and Sunday fireworks shows both face a real chance of delay or cancellation. That's thunder, damaging gusts, and localized flash flooding possible during peak show times. So checking radar before you head out to watch fireworks is honestly worth the effort. Margaret, a retired nurse down in Lake Charles, Louisiana, has treated plenty of smoke-related breathing issues. Margaret says wildfire smoke and extreme heat both stress the body in surprisingly similar ways. That's asthma and heart conditions both worth taking seriously today, she says, not just one or the other. So she tells her neighbors to check air quality apps just as often as the radar. So here's how today's three fronts fit together heading into this holiday weekend. A wildfire in Utah has burned through more than 93,000 acres with 0% contained. A heat dome is pushing dangerous conditions across dozens of states and even the World Cup. And a storm belt is threatening fireworks and concerts for more than 75 million people. Three completely different disasters, all sharing the exact same holiday weekend. Honestly, nobody is ready for how much this pattern has escalated since just this morning's update. A routine Friday forecast turned into one of the busiest updates of the summer. Out of nowhere. Hits different when you realize your holiday plans might depend on all three of these fronts. If you're anywhere near that Utah fire, follow evacuation orders the moment they are issued. That's having a go bag ready now. Smarter than waiting until smoke fills your street. So anyone downwind of wildfire smoke should limit outdoor activity, especially kids and elders, which means keeping windows closed and running an air purifier indoors really helps during smoky days. So checking local air quality readings before kids play outside really matters these days. Margaret says checking air quality before letting kids play outside matters just as much as sunscreen. If you're anywhere near that heat dome, drink plenty of fluids and stay in air conditioning. That's scheduling outdoor plans for early morning or evening to beat the worst heat. So never leave kids or pets inside a parked car, even for a few minutes. That's a car interior turning deadly within minutes, even with the windows cracked. Heat stroke is a true emergency, so don't hesitate to call for help if needed. If a severe warning hits your phone during fireworks, treat it like the real thing right away. So get to the lowest, most interior room in a building the moment thunder rolls in. That's an open field or a parking lot, the worst possible place during lightning. Flat out, no fireworks show is worth standing outside once real lightning starts flashing nearby. Turn around, don't drown. Also applies if you see standing water across any roadway tonight. Comment the name of your town below, and we will work it into tomorrow's update. So we're keeping an eye on all three of today's fronts through the holiday. So updates will follow the moment any of these systems shift direction or intensity. Your comments genuinely help us decide which front gets the closest coverage next. So a three-front stretch like this doesn't line up on the calendar too often. With tomorrow being the 4th of July, this year happens to mark the 250th anniversary. So a lot of communities have extra-large celebrations planned on top of the usual ones. So tonight's forecast carries even more weight than a typical holiday update usually would. Roaring back with a vengeance is honestly the best way to describe this pattern's grip today. Joining forces, a wildfire, a heat dome, and a storm belt rarely align on one single weekend. Keep your phone charged through the holiday, since losing power cuts off your warnings fast. Checking the forecast more than once today, honestly, is just your smartest move. Earl out in South Dakota is watching the fire and storms, and Dale has his flashlights ready. Frank down in Springfield has his radio charged, and Sandra in Alexandria did the same. Margaret down in Lake Charles is checking air quality just as closely as she checks the radar. No joke. This might be the most complicated holiday forecast we have covered all year. Good Lord. A fire, a heat dome, and a storm belt all sharing one single holiday weekend. Mark my words, this pattern is not settling down before the 4th of July even arrives. Plain and simple. The holiday calls for a charged phone, a real plan, and zero guessing. A wildfire out in Utah has already torn through more than 93,000 acres. That fire is sitting at 0% contained, and yeah, That's exactly as bad as it sounds. And if you're anywhere near the East Coast, you're one of 75 million people at risk tonight.